Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Robbie is out a little under the weather, but we have a wonderful replacement in Niall, Stanage, veteran reporter, joining us again at the desk. Welcome back.
Thank you. Always dodgy to be so old that you get referred to as a veteran reporter, but it's always
not
great
at
to
all.
enjoy you
Please,
again.
it's a commendation of your actual expertise in these matters, especially since we have a huge news day today with some really interesting international news developments. So how about you take us right into that?
Absolutely. So, in a stunning move, the International Criminal Court is seeking arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant. Those are on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar is also facing warrants. CNN's Christian Amanpour got the exclusive interview with ICC prosecutor Karim Khan. It was revealed this morning in a video. Let's watch.
For the crimes of causing extermination, causing starvation as a method of war, including the denial of humanitarian relief supplies, deliberately targeting civilians in conflict.
Now, this marks the first time that a major US ally and democratic country has faced arrest warrant charges.
In a statement Monday, Khan also said, quote, "Based on evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant bear criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of the state of Palestine in the Gaza Strip from at least 8 October 2023. It is unclear about the impact of the ICC's move will have in relation to the Biden administration, as the U.S. is not a signatory. It will also trigger congressional action against the International Court." Now, Khan is also going after Mohammed Daeg and Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas leaders, for the attack perpetrated in Israel on October 7th in 2023, in which upward of 1,400 people were killed and at least 245 hostages taken. I know there's some revision of those initial 1,400 numbers down by a couple of hundred after some of them were revealed to have actually been Hamas soldiers that were so burned that they had been misidentified initially. But taking a step back, this seems to be an unprecedented move. It is the result of an investigation that has been going on since well before October 7th into Israeli crimes against Palestine. These seem to be narrow charges that are stemming from the events that are following October 7th. What do you make of this?
I think it is a huge move. Now, I don't necessarily think we should expect Benjamin Netanyahu or Yoav Gallant to be dragged off to The Hague anytime soon. And of course, Israel, like the United States, is not a member of the International Criminal Court. But look, the mere authority of the court now being used to say there is a case to answer by these two people, in addition to the Hamas leaders, that is important in and of itself. It will obviously put the Biden administration in a tough spot, given that, you know, what we see is the administration denying that these kinds of things have happened. Now you have, excuse me, the ICC, as well as, you know, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, an independent task force, talking about the evidence of this wrongdoing. So I do think it's a very significant move.
Yeah, and it seemed like there was a bit of a tell when there were some warnings about these warrants being issued earlier this month. We got a pretty strong reaction out of Netanyahu, who put out a statement, an on-camera video statement, saying that this was inappropriate. There's been a lot of statements, you know, saying that this is basically conflating Israel with Hamas, saying that the ICC is trying to turn Israel into Nazi Germany, saying the ICC is Hamas. And it's kind of ironic because the ICC has had a reputation of only actually going after countries in the global south. It's joked about as being the International African Court and things like that. And the ICJ has a lot more credibility in kind of equally going after countries regardless of how much power they have on the international stage. So now for the ICJ to have just made its recommendations for further intervention to prevent harm against Gazans and Palestinians in the West Bank from happening. They just, in the last few days, followed up with their petition saying the ICJ has to, the international community has to do something to stop Israel from perpetrating further harms. For this to then come on the piggyback of that does seem to present an alliance of the international community that only strengthens the calls from the groups that you've just described to to not just criticize Israel, but try to stop them from causing further international humanitarian disaster in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the international community writ large is kind of stepping in here. And I think that's important for a couple of reasons. One is, it seems to me a lot of media coverage of this conflict in the United States is purely based on reaction within the United States. Now, on one level, that's understandable enough. But I think it does give maybe, casual followers of the news not sufficient understanding of the fact that the US is such an outlier in this respect, basically defending Israeli behavior. The other point, in relation to the equal application of the law, I see that the prosecutor in the ICC reacted or pre-butted some of these Israeli criticisms by simply saying nobody is above the law. That's the kind of phrase that often I think has been hollowed out in various ways before and isn't being here because, he is actually seeking arrest warrants. We do have to say this is part of a process. The arrest warrants have not been approved yet by another panel that the ICC has. But just the mere fact of bringing this charge against Israel or against these two Israeli leaders is important.
I think it's also important to note that this doesn't mean, your point about the warrants not being issued yet is well taken, but also when we've seen something similar happen, let's say with respect to Putin, this doesn't mean that obviously Putin is out of office, that international police break down his door and arrest him and bring him back to The Hague. What it does mean, however, is that there is some ambiguity about what happens to him if he goes to a country that is a party of the ICC. So when there was this major BRICS conference recently in South Africa, there was a choice for Putin not to go because there was the possibility that he could be extradited from South Africa at that time. So there are real world implications, even if it doesn't mean necessarily that it's a kind of a government toppling outcome for these warrants to be issued, or even that any arrest will actually take place, assuming, of course, that these folks don't travel to places that are members of the ICC. And it is worth knowing that we are in the minority globally and not being a party to this and other sort of international treaties. And that does give the very distinct impression that the United States and other global powers do think that they are, in fact, above the law.
Yeah, that's right. And the travel issue, I think, is going to be one of the really most important practical realities of this. Is someone like Mr. Netanyahu now going to curtail any international travel for fear of being arrested? Now, the Hamas leaders, 3 of whom have also been charged or are having warrants sought for them, Mr. Sinwar, I don't think is probably going anywhere very fast. But there is an issue with the political leadership of Hamas, which has been typically, based elsewhere. Do they have to also curtail travel because of the dangers of arrest for them?
Yeah, that is interesting. When, again, these threats were percolating earlier in the month, there was an interesting sort of asymmetry between the reaction that we saw from Hamas leadership and the reaction that we saw from Israel. Netanyahu came out with a statement where he said, we will basically take it out on the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Oh, you don't like what we're doing now, basically? We're going to do it even harder if you do issue these warrants. Now, this can be performative. This isn't, I don't mean to make a broader moral claim here, but Hamas leadership put out a statement that said, we welcome the investigation, come what may. And I do think, again, that that was back in January when there was the first indications that these warrants might be coming down the pike. And that does seem to suggest, I think, something about what the expectation of the two groups relatively is about how they're going to be perceived on the public stage. Sure. Hamas, it's already perceived as a guilty party in every respect. Israel is not. And so you can appreciate why there would be some kind of almost a leveling that would happen if finally, after Hamas has been accurately criticized for killing civilians and those kinds of things, if at very least there was some reassurance that those same kinds of critiques were going to be made on the other side.
Right, and the Israeli argument is always there should be no moral equivalence here, right? So, look, the Hamas October 7th attacks were heinous, and I've said it repeatedly, and I think everybody has said it repeatedly. That does not then exculpate Israel for one of the charges here, which is using starvation as a weapon of war. It does not exculpate Israel when it drops 200-pound bombs on apartment buildings and things like that. Yeah. But Israel and, frankly, the United States have been very resistant to applying that moral prism to Israel's actions, I think.
Yeah, one other thing, just from a U.S. lens, it's worth noting that while America has been kind of hostile to the ICC, it has been cooperating with the ICC's investigation of Russian war crimes against Ukraine. And now that it's opened up the door that it would cooperate with the ICC in that respect, what does it mean now about what the U.S.'s response is going to be to the ICC now that it investigates one of our allies? Moreover, it's worth noting that a group of American Congress members recently put out a statement of sorts saying that they objected to the idea there being any ICC warrants, kind of a group of Republican lawmakers saying that this is something that absolutely should not happen. So internally, is there going to be a continuation of the doubling down? Are we going to see basically Joe Biden aligning with this conservative cohort of lawmakers that also include people like John Fetterman that say, really frankly, there should be no accountability? They don't use the word accountability, of course, but there should be no investigation, no insight into what's going on in Israel, that they should have a blank check, carte blanche, to carry out what they feel like is necessary to do in Gaza without any restraint, without any caveats from the American political system. Is this, the ICC getting involved, going to at all tip the balance of how much Joe Biden can get away with in ignoring the condemnation of the international community?
It might, although he has shown quite a lot of resistance already to ignoring the pressures of the international community, right? So I will be really interested to see what the United States government, whoever is put up for the press briefings today or the following day, says about this. Is it going to be a somewhat neutral, modulated response? Is it going to be an attack on the ICC? I can't imagine really that they are going to embrace this move on the ICC's part, especially since we're only, a week or so on from the State Department report that you and I spoke about before, which seemed to go to great lengths to sort of maneuver around or extricate Israel from the logical consequences of some of these actions.
Are we going to see you at any of those press conferences?
I'll see if I can pop up and ask some questions if the opportunity arises.
All right, looking forward to it. Stick around. We've got a lot more Rising coming up next.